Welcome to the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. If you're just a beginning gardener or you want good gardening information, well, you've come to the right spot. Those of you who are familiar with my garden radio shows here in Northern California, which I've been doing since 1982, might be wondering, well, what's the reason for this podcast? Well, even though I'm fond of saying all gardening is local, Garden Basics with Farmer Fred will be reaching out to gardeners wherever they may happen to be, with garden tips and growing advice that apply just about anywhere. We'll strive to explain garden jargon and terms anyone can understand. And we'll be talking to garden experts from throughout the world who will share their vast plant and soil knowledge with us. And we'll be answering your gardening questions. Think of us as your one-room schoolhouse for growing your backyard garden of fruits, vegetables, and flowers that attract the garden good guys, beneficial insects, and pollinators. And we'll have some fun, too. Let's get started. How many times have you gone out to your backyard tomato patch? You've reached in to harvest what looks like a big, juicy, ripe red tomato, only to have your fingertips realize, somebody's been eating my tomatoes. Who's the culprit? We round up the suspects and interrogate them one by one. But there's so many possible offenders, it's going to take us 2 episodes to get through them all. Plus, we'll offer tips on controlling those unwanted tomato chewers and tell you about the garden good guys that are helping you out. And by the way, some of those good guys, you might not even think of them as being beneficials, but they are. We learn something new every time on Garden Basics with Farmer Fred, and we'll do it again today in episode 39, Who's Eating My Tomatoes? And we'll do it all in under 30 minutes. Let's go. Many questions have come into the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. Many questions, and people are asking the same question. What's eating my tomatoes? Let's find out. Debbie Flowers here, our favorite retired college horticultural professor. And Debbie, when it comes to strangers munching on tomatoes, it's usually the wormy kind.
Yeah.
In a lot of situations.
Yes, it often is. The worms are the larvae of moths. The adult moth comes in and lays the eggs on the leaves of the tomato plant and flies off in the night. It's typically a nighttime thing. And then the eggs hatch, and when they hatch, they're very small eggs. And then when they hatch, they're very small larvae, and they feed on the plant and eventually on the fruit. So it takes a good eagle eye person to find them when they're young. Often what we find first is their poop on the plant, which looks like black ashes almost. And the bigger the ashes, the bigger the fruit. So if I see that in my garden, I look up because the poop falls. Yeah. So I look up in the plant and try to find the worm that's causing that problem. And the easiest way is to control them is to pick them off. Tomato hornworms and tomato fruitworms are the primary offenders in this case.
The moth that lays the eggs that become the tomato hornworm, also known as the tobacco hornworm, they're like kissing cousins. Mm-hmm. This moth is a beautiful moth. It's called the Sphinx moth, and it has like a 6 or 7 inch wingspan. Mm-hmm. Some people refer to it as the hummingbird moth because it has this long proboscis and is very attracted to Nicotiana.
Right.
At night. You may be surprised to see it. Like it almost looks like a hummingbird, but it's a moth and it only comes out at night.
Right. You have to be out at night.
Yeah. And it lays the eggs that become the worms, and the worms are laid on the underside of the leaves usually.
Right along where I found them is right along the margin of the leaf. So the very edge of the leaf, but definitely on the underside. And they're sort of an opaque white color, very small, maybe the head of a pin. Mm-hmm. If you here in Central Valley of California, I have found them to be there right around the beginning of July. And so one of the treatments is to use Bacillus thuringiensis, which is a naturally occurring disease that in soil, but it's been made into a concentrate and marketed. You can buy it as a powder and mix it up as a liquid and spray it on the plant. And the eggs will still hatch and the larvae will still come out. But when they eat the leaves, which is where they start, they will eat enough of the Bacillus thuringiensis, also called BT, as in boy and Tom. Mm-hmm. very readily available, and then it kills them. I know some people, you were talking about how beautiful a moth it is. I know some horticulturists who don't kill the tomato hornworm because they love the moth. They let it gets bigger and bigger, probably 2 inches long maybe, and it's green colored, and it has a sort of a spike at its tail end, and that's where the horn part of the name comes from. And it'll eventually drop to the ground and form a chrysalis or a pupal case, and it spends its pupal or rest period in the soil. And so if you have a lot of tomatoes or a lot of tomato hornworm damage and haven't caught it in time, you may have a lot of those. They're almost, they're brown and they're almost mahogany color and they're hard.
They look like footballs.
Okay, a little longer compared to their width, but yes, you'll find those in the soil if you're digging in the soil. But I know people who just let them lie and because they like the moth so much.
One of my most exciting evenings as a gardener, I was out planting something. It was like in mid-April. And a few feet away in this raised bed, all of a sudden, the ground started moving.
Ooh.
And the moth emerged from the soil.
Oh, wow.
I go, the miracle of nature.
Oh.
And I stomped it with my foot.
Oh, geez. Well, when they first emerge, they just sit whenever any moth or butterfly does, and they have to pump liquid into their wings before they're able to fly. Oh, what a bummer.
for the moth, yeah. But
yeah, for the moth.
I figure I saved a few tomatoes that way down the line.
Right, you probably did. A couple of other controls. One is birds. Where I live now, I have not had tomato hornworm problems in my garden. I find them occasionally, but they don't grow to full pupil size because there are power lines above my tomato bed, and the birds sit up there and watch and come swooping down and pick them off. It's great bird food. Another is to till. Tilling is not recommended in general anymore for soil. It disturbs a lot of soil structure. But if you have a very high infestation of tomato hornworms, rather than digging through it and sifting for those pupal cases, just tilling would break up those pupal cases and get rid of them.
If you don't want to live under power lines, and I would understand why you wouldn't, but if you still want to attract birds to your yard, there's a lot to be said for evergreen shrubs, because they serve as great bird hotels for the smaller birds, who are the ones who go after the tomato hornworms.
Yes, and they nest in evergreen shrubs, and so they're most in need of food when they're feeding those babies, and the two often coincide when the tomato hornworms are out and when the birds have babies that they need to feed.
And we should emphasize we're talking evergreen shrubs, not trees, because of the protection that a shrub provides the smaller birds from larger birds, for example.
Yes, very dense.
And it does work. Another predator of tomato hornworms, and I've seen this in action too, yellow jackets.
Yes, I have seen that as well.
And paper wasps.
Yes.
They will actually land on a tomato hornworm, take a big chunk out of it,
and cut it in pieces. Yes.
And fly it back to their nest.
Yes. And if you wait, they'll be back. And they do the whole, yes. That was incredible to see. Yes.
But, especially in terms of yellow jackets, you probably want to eliminate most yellow jacket nests. Paper wasps, on the other hand, I don't have a problem if their nests are away from high traffic areas and not, say, under the eaves of the patio door where they tend to form their upside down egg carton egg cases, or inside pipes of clotheslines or things like that.
Yes.
But because paper wasps will protect the nest, but that's about it.
Right. They're peaceful unless you disturb them in the nest. Right. I while teaching, there was a nest I didn't know about under the table where the students were working, and they called me over, and I bent over and I got stung 6 times in a row.
Ooh.
Yeah.
But in fact, I have a video we'll post on the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. We'll put a link to a YouTube video of a wasp chowing down on a tomato hornworm.
Yeah, it's something to see.
Yeah, so, not everybody's bad. They all have good points, so consider the wasp in that regard.
Yes.
Helping you out in your battle against tomato hornworms. What about the tomato fruit worm? They tend to make, instead of big chewing marks in tomatoes, they tend to make little holes.
And they go inside and feed on the tomato from the inside out.
So there's a good chance then that when you pick that tomato and take it inside and slice it up for a sandwich, you might get some protein.
Yes, you could.
Yeah.
You could, yes.
So that might be more of a surprise. What is the control for a tomato fruitworm?
Tomato fruitworm, which, as you were saying, the cousin thing is a cousin of the corn earworm, and it tends to be a bigger problem in a corn patch than in a tomato patch, but it does feed on tomatoes. It is a small moth, only about 1 inch, and it's tan colored. It's one of those, small moths that flies by and you don't really think much about them. Has banded wings, but its larva is varies in color, tan, yellow, brown to black, but it has a black head. And so if you see that on your tomato, you'd have to be out there actually watching to see when it's going into the tomato to catch it at that point. The control is difficult. The worms aren't very big. They're a 1/2 inch total. And so again, we'd go back to the hopefully natural predators, wasps, birds, those kinds of things, but also the use of BT. And you'd have to check with your local master gardeners or cooperative extension, somebody like that, to find out when's the best time to apply it. But BT only works if you apply it when the larvae are very small, first out of the egg, because they have to eat a certain quantity of it in order to kill themselves.
And that means it wouldn't be any good to spray BT where the worm is already inside the tomato.
No, it won't do anything.
Yeah.
So then you'd handpick and destroy that tomato.
Right.
So that it doesn't pupate, make another adult, which then lays more eggs.
I think the bottom line is before you serve a tomato from your garden to a guest or to your neighbor, unless you don't like the neighbor, look for little pinholes and maybe cast those aside, or again, for that neighbor you don't like.
Right.
All right. Other chewing critters that we see here in California, and they can be elsewhere. I know in the Southwest they're fairly predominant, are the green fruit beetles. And this is a beetle that's often confused with the Japanese beetle. The Japanese beetle is much smaller. The green fruit beetle is about 1.5 pennies in diameter, if you would, whereas the Japanese beetle is about 3/4 the size of a penny. So it's much bigger, but it does have that iridescent green wings, and you can really tell the green fruit beetle when you disturb it on a tomato because it will fly away, but it makes the sound of a World War I biplane, and it's really loud. And that's what shocks most people is the noise of the green fruit beetle, but they will be eating your tomatoes. It's not uncommon, especially if you go out there in the morning, to see a bunch of green fruit beetles going after your tomatoes. To control them, if you get there early in the morning, they're kind of slow, and you could dump them into a bucket of soapy water. There is another way, though, to trap them because they're very attracted to grape or peach juice, like a 50-50 mix of grape or peach juice and water. And you can capture them with a homemade trap. You put, about 1 gallon container and place several inches of that peach or grape juice plus water mix into that 1 gallon container. And in the opening, put a funnel of wire mesh with its widest opening facing up. The beetles are attracted by the bait. They'll land in the funnel and they'll be guided to walk down into the container. But once inside, they can't escape. So then
Tricky.
So then you have this gallon container with green fruit beetles floating in it, and you can just...
I wonder if chickens would eat them.
Chickens and ducks. Mm-hmm. If they were on the ground...
If they were on the ground, will they eat them dead? Like, could you take your bottle of your trap?
I'll let you try that.
I don't have chickens, but...
No, you don't have green fruit beetles either, apparently.
No, I have never seen them.
Oh, they are...
Isn't that amazing?
They're cute. They're really cute. We know a mutual friend of ours is a retired state entomologist who grew up in Mexico, and he says that for entertainment as a child, they would capture the green fruit beetle and tie a string around one of their legs and use it as a balloon.
Because it flew.
Yeah, because
but you probably hear them coming because of that loud noise they make. Now, you did mention the Japanese beetle. And Japanese beetles, if you live in Japanese beetle country, you know to fear them in your landscape. And they have the potential to eat tomatoes, but it isn't high on their favorite food list. They'll eat peppers and eggplant before they eat tomatoes, and those are all in the same family. But even before they go to the peppers and eggplant, they will go to the cucurbits, so cucumbers and squash. So it's not likely that they're going to be on your tomatoes.
All right. Now, these are just the chewing insects that we've been talking about. There's a whole host of other chewing critters out there going after your tomatoes, and we don't have time to talk about them. This time.
All right.
We'll save it for the next episode.
Sounds like a plan.
And we'll do the bigger chewing problems of your tomatoes. There's plenty chewing on your tomatoes. We'll talk more with Debbie Flower next time about more of what's eating your tomatoes. Debbie Flower, thanks for a few minutes of your time, and thanks for giving us some tips on controlling worms, especially that tomato hornworm.
Yeah, I love those tomatoes. They're worth preserving.
The Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast has a lot of information posted at each episode. Transcripts, links to any products or books mentioned during the show, and other helpful links for even more information. Plus, you can listen to just the portions of the show that interest you. It's been divided into easily accessible chapters. And you'll find more information about how to get in touch with us. We have links to all our social media outlets, including Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Also, a link to the farmerfred.com website. That's where you can find out more information about the radio shows. You remember radio, right? Now, if the place where you access the podcast doesn't have that information, you can find it all at our home podcaster, Buzzsprout, buzzsprout.com. Just look for the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. You'll find a link to it in the show notes. Well, we've learned on this show that not all perceived bad guys are totally bad. And I'm talking about yellow jackets and paper wasps. You may fear their stings, but they're out in the garden helping you control tomato worms. There's another wasp around that you might fear, but it's actually a really good guy because it's going after black widow spiders. It's called the mud dauber wasp, which can be found in many parts of the United States. We recently talked with Rachel Long. She's a farm advisor based here in Northern California in the Yolo County town of Woodland, and she told us about the mud dauber wasp and what it looks like and what it does.
So a mud dauber looks like a paper wasp, and it is in that wasp family, and it has basically that little narrow waist, and some types are black and yellow, so it does look just like a wasp. But the mud daubers actually are only predators of spiders, and they love spiders. So what they'll do is that they'll go out and they'll hunt for spiders, and then they'll take these spiders back to their nest. And their nest are these little mud, like globs of mud that are usually attached to the walls. And so they'll sting the spider, they'll bring it back to the nest, and then they'll lay an egg on it, and then they'll seal that little cell up. And then the egg hatches, and the larvae of the wasp then feeds on the spider and eventually develops and pupates and becomes an adult again. And so the mud daubers are just really incredible spider hunters.
Well, I could see the confusion then among gardeners and homeowners who may see these little blobs of mud. They're usually underneath the eaves of the roof, and you'd see them as you walk around the house on the outside, and you think, well, what's going on there? And then you see a wasp going in and out, and you might panic and try to kill it. But before you do that, I guess the good thing to do would be to get it positively identified.
Right, that's exactly it. And there was a case where a woman brought in some of these wasps that she had actually killed with a fly swatter or spray or something, anyways, into her office, and she wanted to know what they were because she said they were flying sort of in and around her house, and she was worried about them, that they might attack people. And but it turns out that these were actually mud daubers, so they're very, very gentle in the sense that they don't defend their nests. And so they're not social like honeybees or wasps, that'll build these nests, and then if you disturb them, they'll just go after you and sting you. So they don't have that capability of defending a nest. And so the mud daubers are actually they're not social, and so they're just really gentle and are very important because they're out there hunting spiders. And actually, there's a couple of different types that we have here in California. And one is this yellow and black mud dauber. They have a very, very long, thin waist. And then again, they make these mud tunnels that are attached to walls and under eaves. There's another one that's the blue metallic mud dauber. It's absolutely my favorite. It's so beautiful. You know, they're about maybe a half-inch long. And those metallic blue mud dauber wasps only hunt black widow spiders. And that's their favorite prey. And I remember accidentally knocking down one of their nests, and the thing hit the floor of my garage and shattered. And there must have been 100 black widow spiders that were in there, just tucked in there, and larvae of this the blue mud dauber wasp that was feeding on those black widow spiders. So I have a friend actually, and her father used to leave a little drippy faucet outside at their farm for mud daubers to have mud to make their mud tunnels. And she says, this friend of mine says, that she never had black widow spider problems at her home and on her ranch because her dad left a little leaky faucet, which allowed the mud daubers some mud to make their mud tunnels and hunt spiders.
I could see how that could cause a lot of fear in some people who went to knock down with a putty knife one of those mud dauber nests, and it fell open and there's all sorts of spiders in there, black widow spiders perhaps. But right. I guess in this case, though, by the time they're in that nest, those spiders are paralyzed.
They are. So actually these wasps that they actually will grab a spider. So they hunt spiders. They're always on spider patrol, and they'll grab a spider and they'll sting it and inject a venom inside that basically just paralyzes the spider. So I was really alarmed at first too when I broke open a nest and there were like 100 black widows in there. And but then I noticed that none of them could move. They were just paralyzed. And so you're not going to be stung by these wasps because they don't protect nests, and then you're not going to be bitten or stung by the spiders because they're paralyzed and they can't move. So it's actually a win-win situation for all of us in terms of, well, except for the black widows, of course, but for all of us, you know, of having these wasps around in terms of protecting us from some of these very venomous spiders.
And again, I guess those spiders are in that nest for a very good reason, to feed the young wasps.
Right, they are. So these wasps, each wasp will go out and maybe hunt, 10 spiders, and they'll bring it back to their nest, and they'll just pack that nest with spiders. And again, they're laying an egg on that nest, and when the egg hatches, you get a larva. And the larva then just feeds on those spiders, and once it reaches a certain stage, then it'll pupate, and then it'll emerge. It'll turn into an adult, and then it'll chew its way out of the cell, and then repeat that cycle. So you might have a good 10 to 15 cells per mud. Glob of mud, and then you multiply that by 10 to 15 spiders, per cell, and then you get, each of those globs of mud could easily have several hundred spiders in it. So they really do look unsightly, and you just think, yuck, I don't like that. But know that maybe in certain places that it would be good to kind of learn to live with them, because these wasps are definitely important for helping to control spiders.
Can you relocate that nest to some other place, and what would be an appropriate place?
So I think you can. I think you can actually, maybe try to, if it's in an area where you just can't tolerate it and it looks too unsightly, that I think you can gently, use a little, like a butter knife or a spatula, and just sort of gently pry it off, and then maybe move it to some place away from where you don't want it, say perhaps maybe in a garage or a shed or a barn or something like that. Definitely, I think you can move them around. So
you don't have to remount them under an eave somewhere.
I don't. If I don't like something, if I really don't want it right above my door, then I might just sort of gently pry it off, and then with gloves, and then just carry it over to a shed, and then I leave it on a windowsill or on top of a beam.
Even though I'm in a radio studio, I can hear the shouts of some of our listeners who are saying, "No, spiders are good. They're good guys."
Right, I agree. They're hunters too, and so everything has their place in this world. But it's really the black widow spiders that I worry about. Because they actually, they hide in little cryptic areas, and they always sort of surprise us. And so that they're there if they have a really tacky web. But it's just they have their place out in the country and away from houses. But in our houses, if kids, you don't want kids or pets or anybody to get stung by them. So while spiders are beneficial, certainly out in our garden, that around, in and around our houses, that we often, don't want them because they, some of them are poisonous. Well, just the black widow spiders are, and these mud dauber wasps are not poisonous at all. They don't sting, and so it just provides a way of controlling the spiders in and around your house where you just don't lots of us don't want to live with them.
And especially that blue mud wasp adult who goes after black widow spiders. I'll post a picture of it at the Get Growing with Farmer Fred Facebook page.
Good.
So you can see it in its beauty and cheer it on when it's at work.
Exactly. That don't get worried. It might, if it's around and you sort of get a little close to the nest, it might kind of buzz you, but it's not going to sting you. I think it's, everything gets a little territorial when you get too close to their nest, but it's not going to go and attack you or anything. And it's much better than having a black widow spider that's lurking in your garage.
The mud dauber wasp, it's on your side. It's working for you. All right, Rachel Long, farm advisor based in Woodland. Thanks so much for telling us more about the mud dauber wasp.
You're welcome.
There are many good reasons for choosing organic fertilizers when you're feeding fruit trees. For one thing, organic fertilizers, for the most part, are water insoluble. What that means is that they won't break down quickly. They'll last in your soil a long time, slowly feeding your plants. You combine a slow-release organic fertilizer with a few inches of mulch on top, and you have a year-round feeding system going on. Phil Purcell's with Dave Wilson Nursery. They're a wholesale grower of fruit and nut trees, serving independent nurseries throughout the country. And he, too, says organic fertilizers are the way to go for feeding fruit trees.
The reason we like organic fertilizers is that they tend to be very slow releasing. So if you over-applicate, the odds of you burning the tree or stressing it is fairly low. That's, why we recommend organics over, let's say, something like a triple 15. Triple 15 or triple 16 would be fine, but you got to be really careful when you apply that in the heat of the summer. Whereas with organic fertilizers, like I say, since they break down slowly, it just makes it easy for the homeowner not to be overly concerned.
As we've mentioned on this program before, generally speaking, organic fertilizers have single-digit numbers on the label. Those three numbers you see on any fertilizer represent the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in that product. And if you choose a fertilizer with single digits, like a 888 or a 522 or something like that, chances are it's probably an organic fertilizer.
It is.
Garden Basics comes out every Tuesday and Friday, and it's available just about anywhere podcasts are handed out, and that includes Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Overcast, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, and hey Alexa, play the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast, would you please? Thank you for listening, subscribing, and leaving comments. We appreciate it.